Well, let's go ahead and get rolling this morning. I appreciate you all coming and taking a few minutes this morning to just collectively think about our parenting, what we're doing, the direction we're going with our kids, where we want them to wind up long term. And I appreciate you joining with me. I know some of you have kids that are older than mine, and thanks for coming as well. And freely confess, I think an assumption we all realize, I'm far from a perfect parent. And as I mentioned earlier, just even preparing this class was a refresher for me and a realization of many of the areas that I need to work on in my parenting with my children. And I think more than anything, I hope that the value that comes out of this class, I think Kimberly said it well early on, is that we just spend a few minutes thinking about being intentional with our parenting and assessing, okay, where are our kids in their development? Where are they spiritually? Where are they in the way that they react to us, the way that we react to them? And where are we going? Is the trajectory of their life right now where we want it to be, where we hope it will be, and where God wants it to be? So to kind of bring you up to speed from last week we really had kind of a dual focus. We talked one about the objective of our parenting. Like, what is our goal? What is our goal for our family? What is the goal for our kids? That we are pointing them to Christ. Morning. Come on. Our overall objective being creating disciples of Christ, that we don't just want to grow up in a house and raise a family where we are so busy that we are doing a lot of things and we are correcting a lot of behaviors, but we are missing the heart of what we're trying to build, that we are building Christ followers for the long term and not just raising good kids that others can look at and say, oh, those are well-behaved kids. They listen to their parents. They're kind. But no, that we are growing and developing Christ followers who can live and stand for something in adulthood, who understand biblical authority and let it play out in their lives. The second piece of that, when we start off in the foundation of a parenting class, is starting to look reflectively at ourselves. If we're looking to point our children to Christ, we need to be first and foremost pointing our lives to Christ. And that in a lot of cases, it doesn't matter as much what we say, but how it plays out in our life. If we're developing Christ followers, is the general trajectory of our life, is the general trend of our life one that's pointing towards Christ? Or are we showing an example in our own lives that we care more about distractions, hobbies, interests than we do about following God's word and his authority in our life? Finally, we talked about just influence over our kids and a realization that wherever we are in our parenting journey, that ultimately in much of their lives, we have a declining influence, right? Like, we start out, our child is in infancy, we have ultimate influence over every aspect of that. But as they age, there is a declining influence for us, right? That there reaches a point at some time in their life, hey guys, come on in. There reaches a point at some time in their life where the decision of whether or not we have influence is theirs, right? Like, they'll determine if we have any at all. And we hope and we pray that we continue to have that influence well into adulthood. But what we do now and the actions we take now may ultimately play into that. And two, that we can set them up and we can impact how long we have that influence. So for this week, we're going to kind of keep that trend of one, talking over biblical principles in our parenting, and then two, getting into the weeds of how that plays out in the day-to-day and times in our lives and situations that we can directly speak to those big biblical principles that we're talking about. So today we're going to talk about first our authority in the home. What it means that we have authority as parents in the home and how we get that authority. And then second, we're going to take a little shift. We're going to talk about kind of spiritual growth and how to point our children to Christ in very practical ways in terms of teaching them Scripture and walking through Scripture with them in the home. And I think that the overall point of this is a realization that we're not perfect. None of us are going to be perfect parents. But in that, in our faults and in our day-to-day lives, that we continually communicate to our kids our goals, where we want them to be, why we make the decisions that we make, and why we care about their behavior. All right, so starting off with authority in the home. Authority in the home is not a popular topic in culture today, right? It's not a trendy Facebook article on how to live under authority or how to demonstrate authority in the home, and it's something that we hear preached from our pulpit frequently. As believers in Christ, we are a people under authority, and that concept is one that not only should play out for us, again, it's one that we should point our kids to as they grow up in our home. Last week we started off our discussion looking at Deuteronomy 6 and used the example of how God was with the Israelites and instructing them, okay, as you sleep, as you go about your way, be teaching your children, be talking to them about God. In Genesis 18, verse 19, the Lord says to Abraham, "For I have chosen him, that he may command his children and his household after him, to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring Abraham what he has promised him." That he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice. Right in the beginning of Scripture, as God points Abraham to his role, what does he say? He establishes him as the leader and the commander of his household. For us as parents, that is the role we're granted. We are the leaders and the commanders of our household, but we're not just called to lead to our own agenda, right? It's not just what we want to do. It's not an authority that we have in the home. It's an authority that's bestowed upon us. We said God created us as creatures under authority. We see this from the outset, right? Like in the Garden of Eden, what's the first thing God issues to Adam and Eve? It's a command for how to live. We have that on our life. And we as parents then take that authority and have it in the home over our children. And it is funny to talk about authority in these kind of abstract senses here, but our kids know it and understand it well, right? I have 2 older boys and a younger girl. And the youngest of our children, she figured out the authority piece very quickly, to the end that not only did she understand how the authority works, that she figures out how to manipulate it. So we have community group in our home frequently on Sunday nights. And the way that community group works as the evening wraps up, our kids know the drill. Like, okay, it's winding down. It's usually towards very close to bedtime, so you have two things that are expected of you, okay? As people are leaving, expectation number 1 is that you start cleaning up the downstairs basement. Like you clean up the downstairs basement, organize things, and 2, you go immediately upstairs and you start getting ready and you go straight to bed after community group. It's the way it happens. They know it well. So about 2 months ago into community group, as everybody's getting ready to leave the house, my 2 older boys come upstairs and they're like, "Hey, we're ready to watch How to Train Your Dragon." Like, we're and I'm like, why? He's like, "Well, Riley told us that we could watch How to Train Your Dragon, that you were going to turn it on for us." And I said, we don't watch TV after community group. It's bedtime. It's time to go to bed. So why did you think you should watch that? And I look, and down the hallway, I see my youngest eyes peeping around the corner, watching this all unfold. Come to find out, she had gone downstairs to the brothers and said to them, hey, if you all clean the basement and clean it well and quickly, Mom and Dad said you can go watch TV after community group's over. And she had taken, what had she done? She realized if I tell them to clean the basement, they're not going to do anything, right? But if I tell them Mom and Dad said that if you go clean the basement, then you'll get to go watch TV. And guess what? They did it. And she sat on the stairs and watched them clean the basement, and then came up to look down the hall and to see if she was going to get to watch TV with them. And so we talk about authority in the home. Our kids get it, right? Like they understand it, and they will use it and turn it to their devices, just as she did. And we had abundant conversations about that later after everyone departed. But the point of this is that God's authority in our life is real. And we have to understand and clearly communicate and teach to our children, hey, we have authority in your life, but we have authority in your life to make decisions for you, to direct you, to give you commands, because that authority has been given to us. And in that, it's imperative for us that, like I said with my 4-year-old, like she understands and sees how that plays out and acts upon it. Like it's up to us to clearly communicate that why, that biblical principle, to understand that theology and pass it on. To not only model what that authority is, but to also model submission in our home, to model the submission to biblical authority in our lives. And we see for them and can quote the scripture, Ephesians 6, 1-4, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, that it may go well with you and that you may live long in the land. First command with a promise. Colossians 3:20, children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord. God has given us commands, and then we pass that on and communicate that into our kids' lives. One of the things we talk about frequently in our home is when we have issues of disobedience and times that they choose to actively disobey, to be able to explain to them and say, not only do I need to discipline you for this, or do you need correction, but God has mandated me in my life that it's a sin for me to not be disciplining you, to not be instructing you properly. Proverbs 3:12, for the Lord reproves whom he loves, and as a father, the son in whom he delights. We're called to discipline and love, and not just let it slide, but actually God saying, the Lord reproves those he loves as a father in whom he delights. Proverbs 13:24, whoever spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves him is diligent to discipline. Revelation 3:19, those whom I love, I reprove. So when we talk about authority in the home and how it plays out, sometimes for me it makes more sense when I just, in some ways, think about the things that it is not. I mentioned it's not popular. You hear a lot of bashing of authoritative parenting if you read any secular parenting online, that you need to be appealing to a child's conscience, you need to be appealing and listening to what they want, and to get to the root of why they want what they want. But biblical parenting calls us to something higher. It calls us to something a little different. And it lays out for us a reason that there are times that we are the ultimate authority in that, and that for our kids, what does that play out? What does that mean? And I think that, like I mentioned, sometimes for me it's easier to think of what it is not. And being in authority doesn't necessarily mean that we can go to yelling, demeaning, or just forcing a point. It means that we could still say, all right, I'm going to give you an instruction. I'm going to give you a task that I expect of you, and I expect you to do that. And you can appeal, but you're going to need to appeal while doing the act of obedience. We can still listen to our kids. We can still understand the why. But it does mean that at times you may give some instruction, you may give some correction that you can explain to them, hey, right now, I don't have a time to explain the why to you. You may find out at a later time, but for right now, I just need you to do what I've asked. So let's run through just a scenario and kind of talk through something and see how we might let this play out in our day to day. And I'll use an example that I think is one that probably played out for most of us this morning as you're getting ready to go. So you think about in the little moments of parenting, in the times that you issue out a command, what is the obedience you expect? And what do you do when that obedience doesn't happen? For us in our home, we've defined obedience for our kids very, very clearly for them. It is you are to obey without challenge, without excuse, and without delay. So hitting on those three pieces: obey without challenge, obey without excuse, obey without delay. So let's just take an example from today. Let's say that you are getting ready to leave and go somewhere, and you issue the command to your kids. All right, I want you to go and get your shoes on and get in the car. All right, so two things: get your shoes on, get in your car. We won't get into details of the age of the kids. If their assumption is they're fully able to do that on their own, and they can do it. Get your shoes on and get in the car. So let me ask you, if you issue that command to your kids at the house, and you don't have to give the Sunday school example. Let's just talk through. If you ask that of your kids, what are the possible responses that you might get? So we'll go simple. So, okay, can't find my shoes. I can't do it, or I can't do it. I don't want to. 5 minutes. All right, so these are falling under what? Kind of the delay piece, right? But these are the nice ones, right? These are the best outcomes. These are the best outcomes, right? What are the possible outcomes? No. Like no. No. I like that. Copying dad. There you go. So no or straight up fit, right? Like meltdown. Meltdown of whatever that means for your kid. Like I have one kid that a meltdown could be like a screaming fit. I have another kid that could just be silent. Like there's both ends of the spectrum, right? Like meltdown. So we got a lot of options, and I laid out the specific. Yeah. Yes. Or.
Because usually if I'm expecting a good, they say yes, it's the person that's a good. Because I get called.
Yeah, you're like, what now? All right, so these are the possible outcomes, right? And there's many, many more that we could think of, many more cheeky comments that we'll tell stories about long after we're old when this happens. But there's an array of potential things. I think the importance is starting off with your kids and establishing what you expect when you issue a command like that. And you can classify these responses kind of in those three categories. Without challenge, I mean, you're going, challenge piece is the no, the meltdown, right? Like the first reaction when we talk about authority and being able to give a command into your child's life, the most visceral reaction early on is like, no, I'm not doing it. I'm not having that. Now, for parents, for us, there's a couple possible responses when we dive into these scenarios, right? So like one is what they do, right? They might completely challenge my own shoes, 5 more minutes. They may have a delay, and I feel like the older that we get, that my kids get. And when we dealt with issues first on, it was like, okay, if I tell you to put on your shoes and you say no, then I'm going to immediately have a response to that, and we're going to address that. And then that's a clear one for us as parents. Like, we know we've got to address that, we've got to talk through it, there may need to be a discipline. And then that second stage being without excuse, they may try to justify their way around it after we've had those corrective moments of, yes, you are going to do what I say. And then finally, the thing that's the little usurping of authority is the time piece, right? Like, okay, I'm just going to stretch it a little longer. I'm going to make mom and dad tell me 2 or 3 more times. And in this example, we can see the pieces of for us, the theology that plays out. That in a lot of ways, when these things happen, they're a little bit of pulling the authority back. The kid's saying, all right, I'm going to do this on my terms, on my time. And the call for us is then as parents, like, okay, we need to respond to that, right? Like, we need to issue some response and think about what we're teaching here. So, all right, there's the kids' responses. So we'll say if a kid is in some of these responses or issues some of these actions with the command, what are our possible responses? What can we do about it? Good and bad. Okay, find the shoes. So we could assist. What? Ask why. What are some probably not the best responses? I mean, let's be honest. We've all resorted to them at some point. You know, I don't need to. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, you're like, okay. And then you reach that point where you yell, get them on! Other possible responses. By reward. Might negotiate, right? If you get in the car, I'll give you some candy. Like, you might go the negotiation route. Oh, yeah. Some punishment. Some, if you don't follow this, then there will be this negative repercussion. Well, we do the counting thing. Like, right? Like, yell. We could do the countdown. Anything else? So there's a lot of possible outcomes, and what I'm appealing for this morning is to think about, even in a rushed moment like this, like, what are you teaching with these, the response that you get from them and how you choose to respond, and which are the ones that are most severe or the most concerning, that speak to an issue of the heart. And we're going to talk about heart issues more next week, so this is going to bleed over a little bit. But we hear Herschel say frequently from the pulpit, like, a little sin is still sin. Like, a little disobedience is still disobedience, without challenge, without excuse, without delay. So for us as parents, if we issue these responses, we have to think about, like, what those responses are teaching our kids, what that input is to them. Because, right, if they're looking for that piece of authority, how we respond is telling them something about what happens the next time, right? If we pick yelling or counting, like, if we decide, okay, like, we're in a rush, like, you're not doing it, like, I'm just going to yell and scare the life out. Like, what does that input teach my kids? Well, it probably teaches my kids a couple things. Like, one, we can ignore dad until he yells. Like, all right, if he tells me to do something, like, he's not serious until he's yelling. We do the countdown thing. Similarly, start to learn. All right, dad's not serious about his authority until he's counting down. And then when he's counting down, I need to worry about it, right? There's one other we didn't put on here. There's kind of the compromise, like, okay, and this again is like, all right, if you put your shoes, I'll come help you put your shoes on. Like, come over here, let me put your shoes on. You've had a rough day, a sleepy morning. Like there's another piece of it to that, right? Like if I'm compromising, if it's a skill that I know that my kids can clearly complete, we'll say that caveat. Like if I know that you can do it, then we're not going to have a compromise and a negotiation moment. If I've asked you to put your shoes on, I expect you to put your shoes on. You go through that's kind of the negotiation pieces. You can go the punishment route. Like if you're saying like, okay, you're going to obey me or XYZ will happen. There's a punitive punishment that comes with it. This again is input. Like you may well take that hardline stance and it may result in a well-behaved kid on the outset, right? Like you may get the result that you want in the moment, but what is that speaking to long term? Is it developing a heart that is obedient? Is it developing a heart that's pointed towards Christ? Or are you just correcting behavior that happens when you're around, when it's in front of you? Yeah, there's a good way. That's a good piece to put in there. There's the threatening piece where it's, all right, we're in a hurry. I'm going to threaten you with all these things till I get the outcome I want. But my child learns, like, I'll never follow through with that threat. Like, I'll just say and yell out that mandate, but there may or may not really be a consequence to it. So what I want to encourage you with from this is to think about when you have these seemingly little moments time after time with your kids, to think about the overall trajectory of your parenting. Are you having a conversation with them and saying, like, look, when I ask you to go and get your shoes on and get in the car, there's an acknowledgement that God has given me authority over your life and that I am telling you to go do this. I expect you to do it immediately, without delay, and without excuse. And guess what? I don't have to yell for that to happen. I should not have to resort to yelling, and I'm not going to for you to get to obedience. I'm not going to count down. And walking through your explanation to them when that happens. And what's the hardest part about all of that? You're late, right? We talked about last week, like parenting takes time, and there are going to be times when you may not have time to walk through a full explanation of why there needs to be immediate obedience and why a meltdown will not be acceptable. But that general trajectory is there are enough of these little instances in the life of your child that you've got to find time to take a moment and instruct and walk them through like what you expect and say why it's expected and what the outcome will be. And in thinking about this, again, I fully acknowledge there's going to be times where we as parents have failings in this. There are going to be times when we may come back and apologize for our anger in situations like this when we don't respond in instruction to our kid. But think about moving towards that general trajectory for you as a parent, that you are having these explanations and these conversations with your kids. And also realizing, too, that if any of these consistently work, they will continue and get worse, right? Like if your child throws a fit when you go out the door, and it means that you stop with them and you negotiate a reward or you put your shoes on for them, if that behavior works, it's going to continue, right? It's going to continue. So think about these moments. And for me, when I look back on our 3 kids' lives, and I can see particularly at the 2 to 3 year old age range, every one of them went through a phase where, and again, distinctly recall with each of the 3 of them, some hardline times when they decided, I'm going to challenge mom and dad's authority, and I'm going to challenge it hard. And in most cases, it was a very short window initially, followed by, hey, things got better. The general trend, we're really happy with it. And then it would come back. They'd enter into a new phase of questioning that authority again. And for us, that's a cycle that we can expect. Heather and I talk about it in our home now, like, okay, they're in a season right now where they're really questioning our authority. Things are really challenging. But we know that if we're consistent, if we continue talking them through this, and if we remain consistent, like that season will pass. It'll come up again. But for right now, it may hit hard. I remember particularly with one of our children, a specific instance where they were just like not doing it. And this was, I think they were about 3, and they had a little train set. The train set was sitting in the living room, and they were done playing with it. I'm like, okay, it is time for you to put the trains back in the box. Now, nope, not doing it. Like, all right, I told you very clearly, I'm going to ask again, like, put the trains back in there. Clearly, that child understood what I was asking. Clearly, they were capable of doing what I asked. And they decided, like, no, I'm not going to do what you asked me to do. And for us at that time, that wound up being about a 2 to 3 hour affair of us talking through and talking through them like, okay, why? There's no reason other than you just don't want to do what I've asked you to do. Like, I am more patient than you. I am more calm than you. And I will sit here and you will put those trains back in the box. And it took a long time. There were periods of discipline, and there were periods of just sitting there with them and saying, like, you're going to do what I ask you to do. And you say, well, why does that matter? And as funny as I was prepping this lesson, I was thinking a lot about, like, what could have done differently in that case? Well, I could have just issued a discipline, and that would have been done with it. And he didn't have to put the trains back in the box, so just go on with life. But in that instance, it was important to teach 2 pieces. Like, one, yes, that is going to result in a discipline, but also you're still going to have to do what I ask you to do. And I think it kind of harkens back to, like, the Jonah example, right? Like, God said, go to Nineveh. Jonah said, no. What happened? Like, he got swallowed by a fish. Well, after he got out, what happened? Did he go back home? And God was like, there's your lesson. Next time I tell you to do something, you do it. Like, no. Jonah got spit up, and then he went to Nineveh. And there's 2 pieces for us, and teaching that long term to our children of, yes, when I ask you to do something, I mean it. And I think that there's a lot of pieces to this. I feel like we could talk it over for hours on this particular set, and you all have your own examples from your life. But what are you teaching? What are you establishing? Are you aiming for some consistency here? And 2, that very important piece of, like, are you taking the time to discuss it and think about what you're teaching them with the input that they have and the output that results from you? And a lot of this, I mean, it sounds so simple. It sounds so simple to think about, all right, if we're having these small asks and we're making a big deal out of the small ask, like, why make that big of an ordeal out of that little thing? And again, it goes back to the theology and the principle of, the principle is the authority and the ask. And you're teaching your kids from a small age that when I ask you to do something, I expect a result. And again, you see the negative side of that in our culture frequently now, is if you don't establish any authority in your home and you set yourself up to just be the suggester in chief in your household of providing recommendations, you wind up with teenage kids who expect you to be just that. Like, you can't tell me what I can and can't do. You can just give me some suggestions of best advice, if that. I mean, today, in some parts of our culture, we decide a kid by 12 or 13 can dictate what goes on in the house, from activities and sports to now what they want their gender to be. Like, for us, teaching, 1, we have authority, and 2, why we have authority. So when we hit that age, we can say, like, you know, I'm your mom, I'm your dad, and look, God has granted me this authority in your life. Yeah, I think that's a great point, and it speaks to again the consistency, like teaching these principles over and over again, and changing them to apply to the life. And like Rob said, in that moment, teaching submission, like will take as long as it takes, but you will submit to that authority. And I'm not going to physically force you. I'm not going to do it for you, but it's going to take the time to let you do it. And I think also in moments like these, you can choose times when you're going to teach a bigger principle, right? Like, not out of anger, but like maybe you have a moment where your command is, I want you to get your shoes on and get in the car, and there's a moment of defiance, and you make a big example, and you say, all right, I'm going to tell you that we were going to go to the get ice cream today. Now, because you have chosen defiance, what feels like a small act of disobedience for you means that we are going to miss out on some fun today. Maybe that's a bigger principle you teach in that moment. But again, don't do that punitively. Don't do that out of anger and say, fine, we're not going anywhere. Like, the value in it is talking through what led up to that, why that's a consequence, why it happens. Maybe you choose that and go the complete opposite direction with it. Maybe you choose in that instance to show grace and mercy, and you talk through what each of those scenarios is like. Well, guess what? I'm going to show you mercy in that you don't deserve this outing that we're going on because of your disobedience, but just as God has shown me grace and mercy in my life, I'm going to show you that in this moment. So the value is in that communication of the why. Otherwise, you can just lash out in anger. You can yell and force what you want, but miss the heart of it. And that's really what we're going to hit on next week. With that, let's take a little turn here. Let's take a little turn and talk about, as we, seek and move along that objective of ours of having Christ following adult children. Let's talk about our discipleship in the home and encouraging digging into the scripture, encouraging, family devotion time, reading together and studying in the Word. And I'd say from the outset, I think the thing that's easiest to say for all of us, me included, but is also the most convictional for all of us, me included, is the need to pray for our children at any at all ages, to spend time praying for your kids, pray for their hearts. There are outcomes to hear. And again, we said it last week, we don't shape our children deterministically. Their hearts determine where they will go. They can accept or reject any molding that we provide. And it's not a formula, right? Like, we know that there are lots of children that have grown up in gospel-centered, amazing homes with outstanding parents that have turned their heart away from the Lord and gone a completely different path. On the flip side, we know people that have come from messed up family backgrounds that have found the Lord and have beautiful families and beautiful lives as a result of it. But at the same time, like, it's not all a big crapshoot, right? What we teach in our homes matter, and there's a lot of general trends of following Christ and living a Christ-centered life ourselves and imparting that on our children. We have a much better chance of having a good result out of that. So for us as parents, make talking about God a daily part of your life. Make it as soon as you can, as you bring those children home. Make it as early as they can possibly remember that talking about God is a daily part of what you do. Because if it's just something you do on Sunday, they see through it, right? Like, they see through it. They see what really matters to you in all the little ways. So as we finish the second half today, I want to talk just about two pieces of that, like how we talk about the Bible in our home. And I think it kind of boils down to two different segments. I think there's kind of the organized, programmed way that we can talk to our children and encourage them to read Scripture. And there's more the organic, like the day-to-day, as something happens, we use that as a chance to talk about how the Bible applies to our life. So with that, I'm going to kind of throw the doors open to you. I'd just like to see, first off, For those of you with older kids or even with younger ones that are just starting out, what do you do in your home? What are times that you read the Bible that works well for your kids, or any programs or ideas that you have that have benefited and encouraged your kids to get into Scripture? No, I think that's great. I think some of the greatest parenting examples we can have are talking our kids through when we mess up. Like, yeah, there are going to be those moments where I, I had to ask for my kids' forgiveness this past week. Like, I was way too harsh on something that didn't matter. And yeah, it was a moment where I had to say, like, look, I was not thinking about the right thing here. That was my anger and my frustration. Like, I apologize to you. Will you forgive me? And yeah, walking through those moments are just as valuable. Yeah. So I think you know, I view everything as a path on the road, right? And on the road, there's a ditch on either side that you could fall into. And I think, there's a focus for us as parents on not giving up our authority, like, and not allowing our children to just ignore our authority in the home. And then on the other side of the ditch, like you brought up, there is us not abusing the authority, right? Of us not being domineering and not ever listening and not ever being open to our own correction from others, or especially as our kids age, to view Scripture themselves. So yeah, you're right. There's either side of that road for us to be cautious of. What about, do any of you have any structured times? Any structured times that you set aside specifically for discipleship of your kids? What does that look like for you all? What has worked in your homes? Yeah, I think that's a great, meal times are an easy one to leverage the times that you're all together, you're sitting down. Yeah, car rides. Outstanding. Yeah, that was one in my home. Like when I was growing up that I still remember to this day. Like my dad, we had a long drive to school. My dad drove us to school every morning. He leveraged that 20 minutes in the car every morning and would do something different with us. I remember uh, for one period, we memorized all the books of the Bible. That's what we went through in that car ride. But thinking about times, yeah, that's perfect. I love the car as an example for so many, whatever you choose to do. Now, like when we take our kids to school, the car rides on the way to school, it's praying, it's prayer time. It's thinking about their day, setting their attitude and their hearts right for the day ahead of them, praying about any things that they're worried about, or talking through that with them. So leverage that car time together. Absolutely. Meal times as well. What else? Any other sort of any resources you like to use? Any books? Yeah. I think this one has some of the reduced. Yeah, it does. But as well, but yeah, so this is a great one, the New City Catechism, and she explained it well. This is kind of more of a question and response, so that your kids aren't just active listeners in discussion. But this is a great resource to use, and all three of these, I believe, are available in the resource center that I'm showing you today. And check out that resource center because they're much less expensive out there than you find them elsewhere. But yeah, as you have structured time, I encourage you to figure out some time that works, because we kind of broke that into two pieces, like the organic and the structural, to think about. All right, you want to make sure that you are intentionally making time in the day to teach your kids Scripture and to walk through things with them. And so, great ideas of meal times and car times. A lot of people like towards the bedtime to sit down and read through Scripture together at bed or after dinner. These are three good resources that you can use. The New City Catechism, it's out there. Exploring the Bible is kind of a plan that breaks through, and it's a lot of super, super simple stuff. And I believe the children's ministry went through some of this last year. I'm seeing head nods. Okay, yeah. They went. Um, Storybook Bible is also a fun one for the little kids. This is the big version. I haven't really used the bigger version one yet. We had the little bitty one. But all three of these are in the resource center. Um, And all three good and helpful. And if you have interest in looking at more of those, please, Heather's the book expert. Like she does that well. And also, obviously, JP and our children's ministry, they do outstanding at providing you all resources as parents for us to use. And I would just encourage you in general to get to know JP and Leah. They are both awesome. I would dare say the favorite part of their job is to just talk through parenting with us all and walk through specific issues. And I know that they want to hear that input as they think about what else they can provide to help us as Christian parents, and also how they can really tailor curriculum and what the kids are studying to the challenges that they're having. Really love a lot that they're doing. There's also the Launchpad resource on the Buck Run app. So one thing that we like to do and are fairly disciplined at is Sunday afternoon lunch. Like Sunday afternoon lunch for us, we can get on the app, we can see what the kids have studied in Sunday school and ask them, like, what did you learn today in class? What did you all talk about? And so we can have those lunchtime discussions to see where they are, to see one, are they paying attention and getting anything? And do we need to talk about that and ask more questions? And two, it's a reiteration. When they're saying it out loud, they're going to get more out of it. So certainly, talk to JP. If you want more resources, Heather knows a lot as well. And check out the Resource Center, because all three of those should be out there. And possibly the most overlooked resource in many occasions, just read straight out of the Bible. Like the Storybook Bible, I love it. It's great. Lots of pretty pictures, but train your kids to be able to read the Bible on their own. I confess that I struggle more with the structural times of being consistent with that. Bedtimes are always super hectic for us. We're focusing on getting them down. They're focusing on staying up late. So it's kind of a challenge. So for me, one of the things I like to do is I like to get up early with my boys in particular, because it feels more special to them if I get them up early, and they're also not as crazy yet. They're a little sleepy, and I feel like I get much more focus out of them, and we read straight out of the Bible. And I find the objective for that is for me to tell them, like, hey, morning is when I choose to read Scripture. Here's why. And today we're going to do it together, and tomorrow you're going to do it on your own. So finding ways to teach them and show them a clear example of, hey, the Bible is real and present in our lives. We make intentional time for it, and training them to do it, so that the hope is that it becomes a natural habit for them as well, that they can carry on. Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I think that, and again, Heather is an avid reader, and she has instilled that well in our kids. But books offer a really great opportunity to talk through different scenarios in others' lives and what they mean. And reading with your kids is just it's invaluable. So not only, specifically Christian material, but other books that they may be going through in school, reading through it and talking about, okay, what are biblical examples that we see through, and what are non-biblical examples that we see? How do we recognize them? And offering opportunities to talk to them about what is wise material to read, what are wise inputs into our lives, what are things that aren't, and teaching them how to recognize that on their own, right, is what Kimberly's getting at. But an organic, I think, I share openly my struggles. I just move way too fast. Like, I just move. Everything is urgent for me. I don't know why. I'm just in a hurry. And recognizing that I got to slow down. Like, I have to slow down and leverage the small moments and talk through them. And to think about, like, when I'm driving down the road, my mind is going 10,000 miles an hour about something else somewhere else. And to think about, okay, like, they're in the back, they're asking questions or they're talking, but thinking through it and using it as an example to talk about Scripture, to point them to God. And I love hunting and fishing. That's what I do all the time. It's one of my hobbies. So for me, yeah, I call it a organic or an organic conversation, but really when when I go out and I take the kids hunting or fishing, we're out on the boat late at night, we're going to take a pause and look at the stars, and we're going to talk about how magnificent that is, how huge God's creation is. When we're hunting and going along in the woods and the day is miserable because it's hot and they can't keep up, like we're going to talk about doing difficult things in life and the reward of going through something hard that comes at the end. Using and leveraging each of those moments. And we talk about declining influence and the fact that as our kids age, there are many more outside influences coming in. And so often we are excited and we think about the other good influences that we want in our kids' lives. Now, I would just encourage you to think about how to be that to someone else's kids. One of the things that I kind of fell into that I really, really enjoy is being intentional with where I volunteer here at church. And in particular, I enjoy volunteering for age groups older than my kids because I learn a lot. Because it helps me get a gauge of, okay, in 1 to 2 years, what are my kids going to be struggling with? What are the things that they're hearing? And I think about where my boys are. I've got one that's going to be in youth in 2 years. You know what I want? I want him to be in a D group with Ryan Sturm. I want him to hear from Ryan about what God means in his life, because he's going to be listening to other people at that stage in his life. And I want godly men influencing him and him hearing from them. But also, like I said, look to be that for other people's kids and as they age. And again, going in a year or two in advance, man, it teaches you so much. I had 6th and 7th grade boys over at our house for Discipleship Now for like 3 days. Yeah, I learned a lot. We had a really good time. But it was helpful for me, right? Because I saw what they like to do, which are things that my kids weren't into yet, and made me think about, okay, what do I need to be prepping mine for now? So check that out, and again, talk to JP, talk to Will. I love both of those guys. I fully trust my kids with them, and I want my kids spending time in the church with those people at the helm. And I guess that's the final piece, is that as we wrap up, just encourage you to think, all right, overall, what's that trajectory, and how is my day-to-day life, is it feeding towards that overall parenting goal? And a lot of it comes back to, all right, am I going to church every Sunday, and am I teaching that in my daily life to my kids? And we don't want to have competing priorities or be giving conflicting pieces of information to our kids, right? We don't want to be saying, all right, we're going to do a Bible study every single night at home, but we miss half of all Sundays because of competing priorities. We don't want to send the message to our kids that Sunday is the thing that we do if nothing else is going on. And in the same way, we can have a family Bible study together every single Sunday night and go to church every single Sunday and still miss the point if none of that plays into how we live during day in and day out. So, I like the point that you made earlier. None of us are perfect parents. We all have faults, but in that there's an opportunity to continue teaching, to continue parenting, and to prayerfully ask the Lord, like, Lord, help me in even the little moments in my day-to-day to be wisely teaching my children and pointing these little mirrors that I have to you in everything that I do. Yes? Yeah, absolutely. And to leverage them and take the time to do so. Well, next week we're going to dive into focusing on the heart. And just the thoughtful intention for us of not just addressing behaviors, but to really look at the heart that is behind those behaviors. So with that, let me close us in prayer, and then we'll take off. Pray, Father, we just thank you for this day that we have together. Thank you for this time that we have to sit in your house and to just to seek to glorify you. I ask that you'd help us as parents, help us to not be tired and weary or to be lazy, but to be constantly and intentionally first feeding ourselves with your word, and then with that overflow, pouring it into the lives of our children. I ask that you to help us to just not grow weary or impatient, but to carry on and take the most advantage of the short time that we have with them in our homes. It's in your name that we pray. Amen.